So a couple of pieces on the world we're grappling with. I hope all of you know these trends, and if you don't, then come join me. We'll do a remedial class. The thing that's important to think about related to these trends is that we were trying to address the question, what does it mean for us to think about a long-term strategy for the network that was actually robust to the things that were going on in the world? Right? We took up 28 partners aside about 5 years ago, and actually where they got was to say, we need to look at the things that are happening in the world that are huge, that are here for a long time, and are profound in their effect. You can think of it as, we need to think about the tidal waves that are going to hit the shores of the businesses and societies of which we're a part. Right? Because you bet on trend and manage uncertainty. The thing that's important about these is they are an order of magnitude above where we tend to live and what we experience on a day-to-day basis, and they're here for a long time. So one of the questions is, how has the world changed given the way people have responded to these trends, and is our strategy still robust? So we were asked last year to say, let's look at what's hitting us today. All right, so we went all over the world, try to get input from people about the things that are hitting us today, and identified 5 more immediate forces. Right? I'm sorry for the acronym. We didn't set out to create one. It actually just turned out we got DAPT and realized it was possible to say asymmetry for the first one, and you created one, so we couldn't stop ourselves. I actually think the problem with the word adapt is actually you want to get ahead of it, you want to anticipate it, you want to beat it, and so you don't want to be in a reflective mode, you want to be in a progressive mode. And so it's more than adapt, it's actually deeper than that. But the acronym kind of works for the things we're talking about. 3 things I want to highlight about this. First is, what's really interesting is the conversations that come from this set of constructs you're having at the dinner table, you're having at work, you're having at a national level, and we're having at a global level. One of the first times in history, you have to sort of go back to things like the creation of the printing press, where actually the discussions that we're having in our families are the same conversations we need to have at work and we need to have in a geopolitical context. Because the forces are affecting us at every one of those levels of analysis, and they're very urgent. Now, the second piece is that these are the consequence of people interacting with the megatrends. And what you know is people are going to continue to interact with the megatrends, and the net result is that actually these will be dated a couple years from now, right? So the trends won't go away, adapt will have to adapt. And then the final point is, they're really urgent, and they're kind of painful unless we can really get our arms around them. So let me do them for you. First, the consequence of the world going to a global market economy of some kind, what at our dinner table last night they called neoliberalism, is that there is greater asymmetry in wealth than we've seen in a long, long time. You actually have to go back to the time of the Mughals in India to find the level of wealth concentration we're seeing today. So let me give you the data point that's kind of overwhelming. 8 people are worth as much as half of the world's population. Just let that sit for a minute. 8 people, half the world's population. That is 3.7 billion people. Now, if you think about the consequence of that, at a personal level, at a national level, at a geopolitical level, you see it's really profound, right? One way of thinking about that is there has been radically uneven benefit of the fall of the Berlin Wall. There's one way of thinking about that, right? Now, at one level, you could say, what's so bad with people being successful who actually were brilliant entrepreneurs? The scary part is the beginning of the erosion of the middle class that's happening. right? So it's probably okay that we have really, really wealthy people who sit behind gates and are figuring out how to get to Mars. But actually, what's more worrisome, is the thing that generates economies, which is the middle class. The bottom end of the middle class is falling out. And as artificial intelligence and machine intelligence begins to replace the work that our associates do, the risk is that that accelerates. A country without a middle class is a country that has a lot of trouble sustaining itself. Businesses without middle class have no one to sell business to. So you have this interesting possibility of wealth eating its tail that comes from that, right? So first one is asymmetry. Second one we just spent a lot of time on, and so I won't spend too much, but it is essentially the replacement of work by people, that people do by machines, which then causes the capacity to create completely different business models for all of our client activities, right? We've thought about this one a lot. I won't spend too much time on it. But one of the two important pieces that come from that, first is industry boundaries start to break down. And the second is that you create massive amounts of need for retooling of capability inside organizations for that to work, which is a huge opportunity for us, right? But also, if you think about the dinner table conversation, comes to, what do I tell my 15-year-old about what they should study? If anybody says they know the answer, they're wrong. Because you can't anticipate the consequences of this on the structure of work in the future, right? So you see how the dinner conversation is related, the business conversation is related, the national conversation is related to disruption. Now let's do the third trend. The third trend is age. Now, what's important for you to think about is how these play with each other. I'll come back to it in a minute, how they play together to affect things. The critical point about age is the following piece. Except for 2 countries in the world is getting older. It just so happens that there are 2 categories of countries that are getting older, and they're radically different, right? Countries like Russia, countries like Germany, countries like Japan, countries like Canada, countries like the US, if it wasn't for illegal immigration, right, are actually getting older in a way where more and more people are moving out of working age, and therefore putting huge burdens on the system. So average age of Germany is about 48 and a half. If we keep our present definition of retirement, that means there'll be 1.5 people working for every person drawing on the system within 5 years. That creates an unsustainable political economic model. Now then you can go to the other end, which is actually Central Africa. The average age of Central Africa is 18 and a half. They're getting older, but they're getting older really, really young. The challenge there is that we're going to have to create massive amounts of new work in a place where actually it may be hard to do because of the first 2 things that exist, which is the wealth doesn't sit in Africa, and therefore the investment capacity to create the future doesn't sit in Africa. And second, unlike China and Southeast Asia, who could use a labor arbitrage and an environmental arbitrage to actually, labor cost arbitrage, to actually create less expensive activities, because of machine intelligence and robots, that won't be available to Africa. So it's not clear how an entire continent actually creates the work necessary, joins the world economy and creates the work necessary to have anything but a highly disaffected population in that continent. Now, if that were to occur at the extreme, we're talking about hundreds of millions of people looking for somewhere else to be than Central Africa because life isn't very good there. It will make Syria look like child's play. Now, you see how these interact with each other, right? Now, the fourth one is populism. Now, it turns out in some countries in the world you're not seeing populism, but in every country in the world you're seeing increased nationalism. Now, the issue is, the three things I just described is why we're seeing the fourth one, which is when I feel like my future's not as attractive, my kid's future's not as attractive as mine, or I feel like some people are doing way better than I am, right? If I feel like my future is uncertain because I don't know if I have a job in the future, and if I feel like I'm in a country that won't succeed, or I'm in a country that will put pressure on itself, I close in. The natural psychological response to the first three forces is for us to close in. So it's not at all unpredictable that we're seeing nationalism and its slightly less attractive nephew, populism, emerging or re-emerging for exactly those reasons. Right? Now, the problem in part with populism is that there are still a whole bunch of things going on in the world that are globally interdependent. But what we're seeing as a result is an increased fracturing of the world, read Catalonia, right, most recently, as a result of people saying, I want to get closer and closer and closer to people who are more and more and more like me, because the thing just seems so uncertain, right? And then finally, as a consequence of all that, trust is declining in everything. You know, for a while, we actually had trust in technology, but actually because of the kinds of conversation we just had, we realized that actually my personal data, my information, my actual wealth, because it's captured in information, is at risk in a way I didn't see before, and that's kind of scary, right? Now, key piece is, you can describe this in a way where I can take the mood in this room down really, really far and cause clinical depression in half of you, right? And that's not the goal. The thing I want to highlight in this is that we are at a fork in the road where if we don't manage intelligently the consequences of these five immediate forces, the world will go really ugly, right? Because if you think about this and extrapolate, you know where it leads. If, however, we deal with these in a really intelligent way, our kids' future and our grandkids' future could be spectacular. And it's up to us. Final thought. You can't solve these five and forget the bigger trends, because we'll solve them in a way that sets us up for a less attractive future, because those trends haven't gone away. So the challenge is not just to respond to these, but actually respond to these and bring the mega trends into them, so we bring the future into the present, which is a really tough strategic task. But we're up to it.